Why do we sometimes say, I find it surprising, instead of, I'm surprised? You'll find out in this podcast, and we'll answer more of your questions and doubts about English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Craig?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm excited to be podcasting again with you this week. How are you?
As ever, I'm very happy to be podcasting just like you. There are fewer things in life that make me happier. I know for you, one of the few things might be chocolate cake, but for me, podcasting even beats chocolate cake. What do you think of that?
Even the chocolate cake that you had this week.
That's a tough competition. A chocolate cake which Craig gave me as a present to lift my spirits in these dark days of lockdown during the COVID-19 crisis. And you know what? It has lifted my spirits. I think it might be kind of a vaccine. I haven't got COVID and I'm very happy. Do you think the chocolate cake's protecting me?
Possibly, but to make things perfectly clear, I did send you the chocolate cake because I'm on a diet and I can't eat a lot of cake. And you sent me a photograph of the cake to make me jealous, didn't you? Be honest.
Well, I'm doing Craig a favor. I'm doing Craig a favor because Craig's worst enemy is chocolate. I mean, chocolate would be Craig's ruin. If he was allowed to do exactly what he wanted with chocolate, he'd probably be 6 feet under now. He'd be dead. So I'm doing him a favor, really. Don't you see it that way, Craig?
I think with friends like you, Reza, I don't need any enemies. But enough about chocolate cake. Let's listen to our first voice message of the podcast this week from Federico, all the way from Buenos Aires in Argentina. And Federico has a question about false friends.
Hi Reza, hi Greg, how are you? I am Federico from Buenos Aires. First of all, congratulations for your podcast. Your show is amazing. I've been listening for almost 6 months and I could improve my speaking, my listening, and also I learned new vocabulary and expressions. Sometimes when I read an article or a book, I found tricky expressions like realized, terrific, or embarrassed, which are called false friends. I think that the words mean something, and when I search it in a dictionary, the meaning of the words are absolutely different. What can I do? Can you help me, please? See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Federico, for your message. We really enjoyed listening to it, and it's a problem that many Spanish speakers have, and Portuguese speakers as well, I would imagine, with false friends. Any comments on the message, Reza?
That was a really good message, Federico. Thanks very much. It was very clear, and there wasn't anything there that I didn't understand, and that's always the most important objective of any message. Here comes the but. There's always a but, isn't there? I'm afraid. There are a few little things we could improve, Federico. Don't you think so, Craig?
Only one or two. Federico said, when I search it, he's speaking about words that he wants to check in his dictionary. Use the phrasal verb look up, Federico. Look up is a phrasal verb that you can separate and put the object in the middle. So look words up. So instead of saying when I search it, better to say when I look it up. Or if it's plural, when I look them up. Or when I look words up. So to look up words means to search for words. We have spoken about false friends before, Federico. So if you go back to podcast episode 64, you'll hear an entire episode only about false friends. So go to inglespodcast.com/64 and listen to that episode. I think that will help you. However, you did mention 3 false friends specifically. So let's look at those quickly. The first one you said was realize, to realize something. which we could translate as to be aware of. I realized that I've spilt coffee on my shirt. I am aware of spilling coffee on my shirt. If you speak Spanish, you could translate it to darse cuenta de algo. However, realizar in Spanish, which is quite similar, means to do something or to make something or to carry out something. For example, if you said in Spanish, estoy realizando ejercicios para aprender vocabulario, you would translate that differently. You would not use realize. You'd say something like, I'm making an effort to learn vocabulary. I'm making a big effort to learn vocabulary. So that can be confusing, the difference between realize in English and realizar in Spanish, not always used in the same way. Reza, what about terrific?
Yes, that's a word which often causes problems, that false friend. Spanish people, when they hear the word terrific, they're thinking, oh, must be terrorífico, but it isn't. I'm afraid that is not the translation. Terrific is a synonym for great, fantastic, wonderful, amazing, all those kind of really positive adjectives are terrific. The Spanish word terrorífico, that would be terrifying, ending ing, terrifying. That's terrorífico. Terrific is a positive thing.
And that's one reason why when Spanish speakers speak in English about films with Frankenstein, Dracula, ghosts, zombies, they say terror films. That's not correct. In English, we say horror films. I'm watching a horror film, or I really love horror films. And another confusing word is embarrassed, which is often badly translated to embarazada. So embarrassed does not mean pregnant. Embarrassed means avergonzado. I'm embarrassed, me da vergüenza. I'm embarrassed when I speak English. You're not pregnant when you speak English. Your cheeks go red, your face goes red. You feel a little ashamed. You're embarrassed sometimes. So that's another false friend.
Yes, I've been embarrassed many times, but I've never been pregnant to the best of my knowledge. I hope not.
Let's hope not, Reza. Otherwise, our relationship might take a completely different turn.
Yeah, and also scientific researchers want to probably get hold of my body if I have been pregnant. See what's going on there.
Next, we have a voice message from Juan from Costa Rica.
Hey, my greetings from Costa Rica. I'm a new follower of you guys, and I wanted to say, hey, you are doing a pretty good job. I've been listening you guys, and it's good. I really appreciate it, the fact that you guys are really putting a lot of effort in this, and of course, I just appreciate it. So I hope you guys are doing well in those, I would say, rough times. It's really tricky. I mean,
Thank you, Juan, for your message. Very good pronunciation. And I noticed that your pronunciation is quite American. It has an American accent. Did you hear that also, Reza?
Yes, and it's exactly what I would expect for somebody who speaks English from Costa Rica. Obviously, it's a country which is near the United States and Canada, so you would expect the North American type of pronunciation to be dominant there, and you can clearly hear it is in Juan's case.
And the expression that is typical of American English is you guys. Hey, you guys. And Juan said, I've been listening, you guys. So Juan, remember the preposition with listen. Listen to something. So it's better to say, I've been listening to you guys for a long time. Listen to. And yes, at the end, you said that you hope we're doing well in these rough times, ROUGH, these rough times, these difficult times, these hard times. And you say it's also really freaky, Freaky. It's really freaky. It's strange. It's unusual. And it's obviously very difficult. So we sympathize with you. And we hope you're doing okay over there in Costa Rica.
By the way, freaky is also kind of a false friend, what Federico was referring to, because freaky in English, as you've just heard Craig demonstrate, is an adjective. It's really freaky. Yeah, a freaky situation, freaky times we live in with COVID-19, which is when we're recording this podcast. In Spanish, you say un friki. It's a person who's a bit weird. Yeah, but we don't say that in English. You can't say he's a freaky. You don't say that in English. You can say he's a freak. You take away the Y, the suffix, and that's the noun. He's a freak. But in Spanish, you say un friki. So be careful with that. Freaky can only be an adjective in English, whereas un friki is a noun in Spanish. So kind of a grammatical false friend connection there.
I think you might say I'm a Mickey Mouse freak.
Yes, he's really nuts about Mickey Mouse. So he's a Mickey Mouse freak. Not a freaky, a freak.
Mickey Mouse is pretty freaky. Next, we have a voice message from Kike from Valencia.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Greg. How are you? Thank you for all your podcasts. I like them so much. I'm reading an English book, Sapiens, in order to improve my vocabulary. And I come across with a complex sentence for me, and it's the following. People found it difficult to leave their artificial islands. Here, the object is to leave their artificial islands. However, it puts the particle it after the verb found. I didn't understand it at all, so I looked for some information in the Cambridge Dictionary. And it says that with verbs such as find or consider, it plus adjective plus that clause, or it plus adjective plus to infinitive, are commonly used to anticipate an object. So I would like to ask you to talk about this topic, about this grammar structure, and ask you about how many verbs can be used with this grammar structure. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Kike, for your message. And Kike's reading a book that I bought a few months ago and I haven't read yet. It's called Sapiens and it's by Yuval Noah Harari. And I'm looking forward to reading it, but I haven't had a chance.
What made you buy it, Craig?
I heard a lot of people recommend it, so I've bought it on recommendation, word of mouth, people recommending it to me and saying, oh, you really must read this book. It's very, very interesting. So I haven't read it yet, but I'm going to soon and I'm looking forward to reading it. In that book, Kike says that he came across with this sentence. Be careful of that phrasal verb. It's came across or to come across something. So don't use that preposition with. It's not necessary. It's not correct. I came across this sentence. I found it by accident. I noticed it. I came across this sentence. Reza, do you remember the sentence, the example sentence that Kike used?
I think I do. I think it was, people found it difficult to leave their artificial island. That was the sentence.
So he's asking why we would say find it difficult, that use of it, the pronoun. Well, we have spoken about using the pronoun it before. So it might be useful, Kike, if you go back and listen to episode 49, inglespodcast.com/49. That will give you a lot of information on the different uses of it. But let's look at this specific one for a few minutes. With verbs like find and consider, we can use it for emphasis. And the grammar is it plus the adjective plus a that clause. For example, I find it amazing that some people believe the virus doesn't exist. That's something that I find amazing. And it's really similar to saying it's amazing that people believe the virus doesn't exist. Reza, do you find it amazing that some people believe the virus doesn't exist?
I find it sad, but I don't find it amazing, actually. In these days of conflicting news reports and an obsession with what is and what isn't fake news, I'm not surprised, actually, that people don't believe it. I find it sad that people don't believe there's a coronavirus causing a lot of trouble. But I'm not surprised, actually, Craig, because there's lots of things which I take for granted. That means I just presume they're true because there's overwhelming evidence that these days people question. It's one of the side effects of internet. If you get exposed to lots of conspiracy theories and counter arguments against science, you can end up believing anything, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I find it believable that people believe these things because of the reasons you've given, because of the internet and the diffusion of information these days and how accessible information is and false information, that people basically will believe anything if they read it on a social network platform. So, yeah, I find it totally believable that people believe these things.
One thing I can tell you, and believe me, listeners, is that as far as I know, Craig and I pretty much always tell the truth. You can believe us on the whole, wouldn't you say, Craig?
Yeah, unless you're asking me how much chocolate I had yesterday. Apart from that, I probably will tell the truth almost always. One thing, Kike, just notice that it's not correct to say, I find amazing that people believe. You must have that it. I find it amazing, or I find it unbelievable, or I find it sad, as Reza said.
Well, actually, you don't have to add the word it if you've got another object. But the thing is, you've got to have an object. But you could say, for example, I find Peter's story amazing. Or I find the way he treats his girlfriend amazing. You've got to have an object. So the thing is, if you don't have a specific object, that's when you must add the word it.
Another way to say something similar is to use an infinitive instead of a that clause, and then an adjective. For example, you could say, the Japanese consider it to be rude if you pour your own drink. So the grammar there is the Japanese consider it plus the infinitive plus the adjective. Can you think of another example, Reza?
Yeah, you could say, I find it surprising to see so many people here. This one is very similar, but slightly different to Craig's example. Just let's repeat Craig's example. Notice the order. He said, consider it to be rude. Consider it to be rude. So consider plus it, then an infinitive, to be, and then an adjective, rude. But my example has the adjective before the infinitive. Find it surprising to see. They're both correct. So you can have first the adjective, then the infinitive, surprising to see. Or like Craig, you can have the infinitive, then the adjective. Consider it to be rude. It depends on the sentence. So mine is, I find it plus an adjective plus an infinitive. I find it surprising to see so many people here.
We also use it when the clause or a clause is the subject of a verb, such as appear or seem or look or occur. And when you use this grammar, you make the statement a bit softer and less direct. Let me give you an example. It seems they've started studying English with mansioningles.com. It seems they've started studying English with mansioningles.com. Can you think of an example with a different verb, Reza?
Yes, what about the verb to occur? It occurred to me that we might be able to sell our old TV online. It occurred to me. So I used it there to make it more indirect, less direct. more softer. It occurred to me. I'm not saying it as a fact. We might be able. No, I begin by it occurred to me that. So it's softer.
And by contrast, instead of making things softer or weaker, we can emphasize with it. We can use it for emphasis before a noun or a noun phrase. For example, I can say, Reza helped me, but to emphasize that, I can say, it was Reza who helped me. Can you think of another example?
Yeah, what about this? Imagine Craig had some cheese and he wants to eat his cheese now and it's all disappeared. He didn't eat it. Where's it gone? We could say, oh, Craig, it wasn't me. It was Coco the dog that ate all the cheese. It was Coco the dog that ate all the cheese. So you're saying it was me? It wasn't. It was Coco the dog. So by using the expression it was Coco, instead of just saying Coco the dog ate all the cheese, it was Coco the dog that ate all the cheese. It's very useful to use this expression whenever there's been some kind of misunderstanding or when you're looking for some kind of clarification. It wasn't me, Craig. It was Coco the dog that ate all the cheese.
And the problem with it sometimes from a Spanish speaker's perspective is you tend to repeat it when you don't need to. So you only need one subject usually. And an example would be, my car, it is parked outside. Well, my car is the subject. It's not necessary to repeat it, which is another subject. My car is parked outside, or it is parked outside, if the subject is obvious or clear. But to say my car, it is parked outside is a common mistake. Can you think of another one?
Yeah. What about this? My neighbor, she really gets on my nerves. Okay, I understand you if you say that, obviously, but it's grammatically incorrect because we can't have my neighbor and she. We can have one or the other. So my neighbor really gets on my nerves.
Another mistake that's quite common is to say, it is bad, the news. So again, you're repeating the subject twice. It's better to say, the news is bad, or it is bad, but not, it is bad, the news. And I think one reason for these mistakes is direct translation from Spanish.
Right, yeah. They're thinking, es mala la noticia. That's what they're thinking in Spanish, isn't it?
Yeah. So again, remember one subject is enough, and we don't usually use a personal pronoun, the it, to repeat a subject that's in the same clause. And for more information about this grammar point and about it in general, go to inglespodcast.com/49.
You shouldn't be surprised at what Craig says when he says one subject is enough. It's exactly the same as Spanish. You can't have two subjects in Spanish and you can't have two subjects in English. So if you're going to say, mi coche está aparcado fuera, my car is parked outside, that's fine. Or you could say, with it is parked outside. You could say in Spanish, mi coche, that's masculine, right? You would say, él está aparcado fuera. But in Spanish, you probably wouldn't bother to say él. You'd have no subject, right? You'd just say, está aparcado fuera, right? But you definitely wouldn't say, mi coche, él está aparcado. You can't do it in Spanish either. So, in fact, it's the same rule for English as for Spanish. You can only have one subject with a verb. So ask yourself grammatically, have I already got a subject? My car is parked? I have. Okay, so forget about adding a pronoun because that would be another subject. One subject.
Before we go out the door and say goodbye this week, we have another voice message from Sonia, who is from Barcelona, but at the moment she's living in Berlin.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. I'm Sonia again from Barcelona, but living in Berlin right now. Sorry because I'm sending two voice messages in a row, but today I've been listening to your podcast for 6 hours and then I had many ideas to talk about. And then the second message I just want to share with your listeners, if they also like me, because I'm living in Germany, and with German I have the feeling that I just know some basic words and some basic sentences, but they are really happy when I can speak with them, just to order a coffee or wherever, super easy things. But in English, I always feel that the English speakers want to have a super perfect English conversation, and sometimes it's uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And we did get 2 messages in a row from you. And your second message, actually your first message, will be heard next week because you gave us the idea for next week's podcast. Thank you very much. And I really like that expression, 2 messages in a row, one after the other, one following the other, 2 in a row.
Yes, Sonia, thanks very much for your message. I hope you're having a good time in Berlin, a city where I lived myself for a short while, many years ago, almost in another life. I imagine it's changed a lot since I lived there. And your message was fantastic. But since we've been talking about the pronoun it, I noticed there was a little mistake with a pronoun you used. You said, Sonia from Barcelona, that's living in Berlin. Sounds all right to you, maybe, and to most of the listeners, but we can't use the word that's. We have to use a different pronoun. We have to say, Sonia from Barcelona, who's living in Berlin? Who is? Whose? Not that's. A very, very common mistake. Not just for Spanish speakers, but for all speakers to make. And that's because of the fact that you need to know what type of relative clause this is. The relative clause is the bit that goes, that's living in Berlin, who's living in Berlin, who lives next door, which I saw yesterday, that I really loved. Expressions like that. And who's living in Berlin here is a non-defining relative clause. What do I mean by that? Okay, well, when she says Sonia, then I already know who she's talking about. Sonia. She said Sonia, Sonia, Sonia. So Sonia defines itself. So when she adds the bit, who's living in Berlin, that's extra information about Sonia. But it isn't necessary to define Sonia. She's already defined. So we call that a non-defining relative clause. It's the one which, when you're writing, you have to use commas. And to cut a long story short, if it's a non-defining relative clause, the extra information that isn't necessary to define what you're talking about, Sonia, then you cannot use the word that. That's a nice solid rule which has no exceptions. You have to use who or which or where or when, yeah, but you cannot use the word that for a non-defining relative clause.
And we were checking before we started recording this podcast because Reza and I are both fairly certain that we've spoken about this on a podcast before, comparing relative clauses, non-defining, defining, but we couldn't find the episode. So if we have not focused on this specifically, on this specific grammar point in the past, then we will be doing that in 2 weeks' time. So keep listening, and if we find the episode, we'll tell you next week. And if we haven't, we'll create one and we'll do a deep dive and detailed look at non-defining and defining relative clauses.
By the way, listeners, this is the very first time that this has ever happened to us, that we couldn't find a specific episode that we're sure we've recorded. It's never happened before, has it, Craig?
No, because it usually appears in the search box. If you go to inglespodcast.com, there's a search box. You type in the grammar point, the vocabulary area, the topic that you're interested in, and the episode usually appears. But we could not find defining or non-defining relative clauses. So if we haven't done it, we will do. And if we have, we'll tell you next week where to find it.
It's nice to know that Craig's looking for a technical fault to blame the problem on, that we couldn't find it in the search box. Or is it simply, Craig, that we're getting a bit old and our memory is playing tricks on us?
Probably both. But Sonia was asking in her message about the fact that when she tries to speak a bit of German, people are very encouraging and sympathetic. But when she tries to speak English with a native speaker, maybe they're not quite so patient and quite so understanding and expect perfect English. What do you think? Probably because English speakers, native English speakers, tend to expect everybody in the world to speak English. I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you're right.
And maybe other languages, they're more sympathetic because it's not, German is a common language, but it's not as commonly spoken as English. And yeah, I agree with that, Sonia, and it is quite frustrating. And I feel bad for my fellow native English speakers. I think we should be more patient, more understanding of people who speak English as a second language.
I remember when I was in Berlin many years ago, we're talking 1993, 4? Yeah, it was 1993/4.
It was after the wall came down, right?
But just after the wall came down. I mean, get this, Sonia. Get this means, imagine this, get this. 1993/4 in Berlin. I'd never been there before. And I spent about 7-8 months, I can't remember exactly, living in Berlin. I got to know parts of Berlin much, much better than Berliners who were born and brought up in Berlin. Now, how could that be? Because the wall was not long down. So people who had only lived in West Berlin or who had only lived in East Berlin, they didn't know the other part very well. And maybe they were a bit old and they didn't want to travel that much or whatever, and they didn't have much reason or excuse to get to know the other parts. So I ended up knowing the other part better than some Berliners.
And did you find the Berliners sympathetic to you trying to speak German? Were they patient with you?
Yes, although I didn't make much effort, to be honest. My German is ein bisschen, really not an awful lot. But nearly everyone made a huge effort to speak English to me.
Thanks for listening, Sonia. We look forward to talking about your suggested topic of cocoa next week. And now it's your turn to practice your English. We would love to hear from you and send us a message as Sonia did. You can send your voice messages to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast. It's a free service, but you only have 90 seconds in which to say your message. How can people send emails, Reza?
If you want to write to us, you could email Craig. You'll find him at craig@inglespodcast.com, or you could write to me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
If you're interested in a paid course to improve your English level, on the Mention Ingles website, you can find a selection of lots of different courses. Go to store.mencioningles.net.
As always, a big thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast through the Patreon scheme. If you're interested, have a look at patreon.com/Inglespodcast. The people who help us through Patreon, they donate a little bit of money every month. I think the minimum is $1.21 approximately. The 21 cents is to cover tax. It helps us to be able to provide you with transcriptions.
And we'd like to thank our most recent Patreon supporters who have joined us. Unfortunately, we can't say everybody's name. The list is just too long. But recent supporters include Carlos Martinez Fuentes, thank you, Charo Toscano, Cristina, Susana Ricaño, Monica Valiente Navalon, Valeria, Maria Barrio, and special thanks to 2 people who have donated more than the minimum $1, and that's Gerard and Uriel. Thank you to all of you who are supporting us on Patreon. And if you would like to join those lovely people, go to patreon.com/inglespodcast. Links, as always, in the show notes. What's next week, Reza?
On next week's episode, something that doesn't interest Craig in the least. He has no interest whatsoever in this topic.
Nah.
Chocolate? No, none at all. Chocolate and cocoa beans.
No, I'm not interested. No, I've got absolutely nothing to say about chocolate. So please join us next week for me saying nothing about chocolate and cocoa. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.